Hello and welcome to Switcher Basics. I'm David, and today we're going to go over 4 things. Number 1, we're going to go over switcher operations, how to select a camera and how to make it go live. Number 2, we're going to talk about the multi-view screen, what that looks like, how that's laid out, and what you use it for. Number 3, we're going to talk about camera choice, how to choose the right camera for the right moment. And number 4, we're going to talk about communication and how we communicate with the camera operators and how that works and what technology we use to make it happen. All that and just a little bit more coming right at you right now. And we're back. Yes, here we are, Switcher Basics. You've probably already seen Camera Basics. If you haven't, definitely check that video out. But today we're going to be talking about all the things that we mentioned in the intro. So let's start with switcher operations. Before we get to that, however, let's go over what kind of switcher we use. This is the Blackmagic Design ATEM Television Studio HD. It's a big old name for a tiny little component that does a whole lot of cool things. As you can see on the picture on the box here, it's very simple. And we're going to go over its functions right now. How's that sound? Cool, 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 cool. Cool, 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 yeah. All right, so on the front of the switcher, I don't have the switcher out. It's actually in place in the sanctuary. I had it out for a previous version of this video and went and put it back, and then the video was horrible, and I didn't want to undo all of it again. So we're just going to go based on what the box shows, which is pretty much the same. So on the box, you will notice that there is a series of 8 white switch buttons here, and there's a couple of them here on the box that are actually one's red and one's green. Now, the interesting thing about that, and something that I'll let you know, is that those colors are very strategic. Red meaning live, green meaning preview. If you've ever seen a picture or a video in a radio studio, there's usually an on-air sign that lets you know when the broadcast or when the radio is actually live, and that's always red. So this mimics that in some kind of way. So red is what happens. These buttons will light up on the switcher when they are live. If it's red, it's live. If it's green, it means it's been selected for preview, which means that between the red and the green, if you were to push the auto or the cut button, which I'll show you in a moment, it will switch between the two. Now let's go over to the auto and the cut button. Just to the right of the 8 input selection buttons, you'll notice on the bottom of that stack of buttons there, one says cut, the other says auto. Now there are a lot of other functions. Let me pause here quickly and say, there's a whole section on the far right side of the switcher. There are 4 buttons above the cut and the auto buttons. There is this whole array of buttons above the input selection buttons. We're not going to talk about those in this video. Why? Because we don't have the time. Number 2, this is very basic. We're not talking about how to manipulate individual inputs. We're not talking about audio controls. We're not talking about adding some kind of media presentations through button pushing and all kinds of stuff. We're just talking about how to select a camera and how to push it to the live broadcast, okay? If you want to learn all these functions, there are plenty of resources out there that can help teach you how to do this. I highly advise that you do that. That will be a great way to get you started, and you'll probably find, like if you're anything like me, you'll probably find that it is like super nerddom, and you just love, absorbing as much knowledge as you can. Then again, maybe not. Maybe that's just me. So when you select a camera feed, it will light up green. When you push cut, it will immediately snap to the next angle, to that previewed angle from whatever's red. Here's an example of that. Say, for example, we're in a wide shot here, and we want to go to a closer shot of my face, right? If I snap my fingers, it's going to cut nice and close. Here we go. Now we're a nice close shot. It feels a little claustrophobic. I can't breathe. Let me out of here, snap my fingers, and we're back to normal. Now, you'll notice on the ATEM switcher that there is another button here labeled Auto. Auto is a crossfade feature when it comes to transitioning between what's live and what's being previewed. When you push that button, it'll actually merge the two videos quickly and then push the other one live. I would give you an example of that. Actually, you know what? I will give you an example of that. How about this? Nice and smooth, and now we're back. Here we are. That is a crossfade transition. That's what the auto does. Now, how do we use these in practical application in the Rock Church or in any presentation for that matter? Well, what we normally do, what we like to do is using crossfades for worship settings. Those slower, smoother, more fluid transitions between angles, they look really nice and really polished. So we like to use those when we're transitioning between the lead singer and an instrumentation, or a musician and a soloist, or if we're cutting from, a wide shot of the band to a panning sweep shot of the singers or whatever, using those nice fluid transitions really makes a difference. It looks really, really nice. When we use the cut feature, however, we normally like to do that during preaching. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this later in the camera choice option, but the way we operate when it comes to preaching, we like to cut to whichever camera the preacher is facing. We'll explain that a little bit more later. But if we're using a slow crossfade and we cut to a camera, or we transition to a camera he's facing, by the time it fades over to that camera, he might have turned to a different camera already. So we like to use the cut feature because it takes much less time, it's highly more efficient, and it'll get us to that camera when we need it to be there. So that is switcher operations. Now let's move on to multi-view. The multi-view is a screen, it's a visual output from the switcher. What it'll show you, and we'll have some screens or maybe some B-roll that's going on here that will show you a little bit about that. What it shows you is every input that's available to you, a preview of your next up selected input, and a preview or a view of what you're sending out on the live broadcast. So, top right corner, you'll have what's live. It's called your program view. The top left corner, you'll have your preview view. That's the one when you select the green, it will pop up on that larger portion of the screen. Below that, on our live view, which you'll see in some shots here, you'll see all four of our cameras and their views. So you can make an educated decision on which camera to select next. And then below that, there are 4 blank spots for expansion to add 4 more cameras or other video inputs as we choose to do so in the future. So that's the multi-view. Make sure that as you're selecting cameras, you are using that to make sure that they're lined up, that they're in focus, and as you communicate to them, that we'll talk about later, that you're that you're moving on from camera to camera. Now let's move on to camera choice. Moving from the multi-view where you can see all your cameras to choosing the right camera. How do we choose the right camera for the right moment in a church service? Well, the first thing is you want to make sure that everything's focus is locked in and that it's not an odd framing of something. If you're looking at somebody's nostrils and you can see snot bubbles gurgling out, probably don't use that camera. If you can see somebody in the background who is asleep and snoring, probably don't use that camera. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to be able to communicate, which we'll talk about in here in just a moment, and you're going to want to make sure that you make educated camera selection decisions. You'll use the multi-view for that, and then once you have made your selection, you will use your switcher operations to switch to that camera. A good practice that I like to educate our camera operators with is when it comes to worship service, we're going to start on the central camera. That is the main front. It's actually number 4, camera number 4, or input number 8 on the switcher. And what you do is you start with a nice medium shot of whoever does the Bible reading, who opens service, etc. Maybe pull a little bit wider for the beginning of worship. And then I tell our camera operators, find me something interesting, push in on it, tighten up your focus, whatever, and I'll let you know when I'm coming to you. And then I'll cut to them, And then as soon as I cut away, I tell them as soon as I cut away, find something else interesting. And we'll do that every 15 to 20 seconds so that we have a nice kind of motion happening where you're just featuring all kinds of cool different things happening all throughout. Now, when it comes to preaching, like I mentioned earlier, we like to keep the camera that is facing, that the preacher is facing, to be the one that is live. So what we do is anytime that he turns toward a camera, we cut right to that camera. Anytime he turns toward another camera, we cut right to that camera. And we do that no matter how quickly that cut happens, we make sure that happens every time. So when talking to your camera operators, make sure you let them know during the preaching, make sure that you keep your focus, make sure you keep your zoom, make sure you keep your pan and your tilt and your tracking, make sure you keep it all dialed in so that at any moment we can cut to you if we need to. Now, I will say that there are times that your camera operators are going to need to take a break. That's totally fine. Give them a break. Use the central camera at that point because no matter what direction they're facing, you're always going to catch their face in some way unless they're facing the band or something, in which case, you're pretty much out of luck at all levels because there's no camera behind them pointing at them, except for the GoPro, and we don't want to use that for preaching. So if you need to give your camera operators a break, that's totally fine. You can just track along with them with the motion or with the remote camera in the center. So that gives us everything we need to know about how to choose the right camera for the right situation. Now, this final section that we want to talk about here is communication. Communication, and I know this is probably very cliche to say, but communication is key. We need to communicate as the switcher operator to our camera operators, and we need to let them know when their camera is the one being used. Why is this so important? Good question. I'm glad you asked. The reason that it's so important is because of the fact that if we don't let them know that their camera is the one we're using, then they could shift to get another angle on something, they could stand up to adjust their seat, they could go to take a break or whatever, and then all of a sudden you've got this crazy sporadic movement on your camera. It makes everybody motion sick and nobody likes to watch our live feed. So what we do is we have radios. You'll see through some footage that we're showing you now that we have radios that you put through your ear, and put it in your pocket. You can use the microphone to communicate to your camera operators. Everybody is radioed up. Both camera operators on cameras 1 and 3, the 2 manned cameras in our system, are going to be radioed up. Once they are, you as a switcher operator need to let them know anytime you're cutting to their camera during a worship set. Now, I will say we've talked about giving breaks. That's important to do. Camera operators will know, or you can tell them that if they need a break, all they need to do is let you know. And they can do that the same way. Push the button on the microphone. Hey, boss, I need a break. Can you not use my camera for a moment? Yeah, go ahead. And then they take a break. So there needs to be consistent and clear communication between you and the camera operators at all times. That way, anytime that their camera is on the feed, they'll know. And they're knowing to be nice and steady and smooth. And anytime they need to take a break, you'll know. So you'll know not to cut to their camera. Whew, man, we're moving right along. All right, so we've talked about switcher operations. We've talked about multi-view. We've talked about camera choice, and we've talked about communication. And the last 2 things that I want to give to you today are, number 1, please never forget to have fun. It's so vitally important that you enjoy what you're doing, and there's a lot to enjoy about it. Operating a camera or operating a switcher is so much fun because you can kind of feel like you're in a movie studio making a big production. And essentially, you as the switcher operator, you are the director of this broadcast, of this film we call The Rock Church on Sundays and on Tuesdays. So please, enjoy yourself, have fun, and build relationships with your camera operators and your team. It's so important that you do that. And so valuable if you do. And the second, most important aspect is that this is a ministry. Make sure that you're treating it like one. I've said it before and I'll say it again, and if you've seen the Camera Basics video, then you'll have heard this already, but I'm going to say it one more time. There are 2 kinds of sacrifices that we make. There's a sacrifice of praise when we're literally giving our praise to God. But then there's a sacrifice as praise. And that is when we give of our talent and of our time and of our effort and of our ability. We give excellence to God. And that's what this is going to be. This is going to take some effort. It's going to take some work. And that's okay. Just keep in mind that no matter how hard it is, no matter how much work you have to put into it, no matter how many hours of study and of education you put yourself through to make it as good as you can, that it's all worship. Do it all for the glory of God. And in that light, thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video, and we hope that you take it and run with it and make it something amazing. And in the meantime, we hope you have a great day. So thank you again for watching. God bless, and we'll see you next time.